Hey there, folks, and welcome back inside the Northern Football Podcast, episode 226 of Northern Football. Ben Steiner alongside Alex Gongiruzik. Brendan feeling a little bit under the weather, unable to join us here today. But an exciting week in Canadian soccer. This morning we got some extra news that Desiree Scott is going to be retiring from international duty. Of course, she hasn't really been involved in Casey Stoney's squads as of yet, but she's going to be getting a testimonial match in Winnipeg and then another match in Montreal as well. Canada taking on Haiti in those. But a big week of Canadian soccer already. It's only Tuesday, and it's going to get even bigger with Inter Miami visiting the Whitecaps in the Concacaf Champions Cup semifinals. Alex, I know it's going to be a big week on the West Coast for soccer, and nice to have the attention on the West Coast for once.
Yeah, I mean, it's just been it's been like that for a while, I guess. If you look at the NSL opener, you saw a lot of people getting their focus out here. A lot of people sending reporters and other people out here. And I guess, with this Miami game, definitely one where the attention will be focused here before shifting over to Miami in leg two. And it's just been a big couple weeks yet in the women's game. He got a Gold Cup coming here. I guess it's a bit of a taste of what life might be like next year when you could get up to 4 or 5 Canadian games for the men's national team during a World Cup. It's going to be this is going to feel like nothing compared to that. Even the idea of a sold out crowd at BC Place, I'm going to have to get used to that over the next few months. So I guess in terms of a dry run, it doesn't get much better than this in terms of that hype and attention.
Yeah, I mean, you and I over the last, couple months, either running or yesterday kayaking by BC Place, it's kind of weird to look at that stadium and be like, they're hosting a World Cup. Like, that is a World Cup stadium. The world's eyes will partially have 17 cities hosting the World Cup, but partially be on Vancouver. And that's still a little bit hard to comprehend, especially when you think, we're, I think, less than 400 days out now. Like, the World Cup is basically next summer. It's in a year. And for so long, this World Cup has felt like, oh, it's in 2026. It's far down the line. Like, life is going to be so much different in 2026. And now it's like, okay, World Cup's next year. Like, are we ready yet? And I know we've talked a lot about where the Canadian men's national team stands, where Jesse Marsch stands heading into the World Cup a year out. But, even just from sort of a fan perspective and a media perspective, it's very weird that, like, we are a year out from the World Cup effectively.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you're going to start getting a lot of important milestones. You saw it last window. You got teams like Japan, New Zealand, Argentina booking their spots at the tournament. So it's not just Canada, US, Mexico. You got 6, 7 teams now already. Soon we're going to be having a draw, by the end of the year. You're going to be all of a sudden, like, that's what I was thinking about last night. Like, oh yeah, you can start scouting who's Canada's going to be playing in less than 12 months time. You're going to start planning, like, this is what their journey to a World Cup semifinal, quarterfinal, final could look like, depending on how big of a dreamer you are. There's going to be other key milestones, right? Just we saw last week the Vancouver poster release, something small, but there's an event for that. You go and you kind of see like subtle signs that it's all coming together. So yeah, on one hand, feels like it's just like so quick. Like, you think, man, they got to get some shovels in the ground in terms of the accelerating the training center they wanted to build at Killarney and, accelerate some infrastructure. I mainly think of the SkyTrain along Granville. It'd be nice for them to finish that ASAP, because that would help a lot. And then you think of other factors like, on the other hand, like, the city has hosted big events before, and you feel like it'll be able to step up. It's a bit of a twofold. I'm sure your concern will depend if you're an administrator or if you're just a general, a member of general public.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to engage in some conversations with some of the people that are organizing the tournament in Canada and Vancouver at a FIFA event for media members as they unveiled the poster and kind of launched publicly and to the media their efforts in Vancouver, which was interesting to see. A bit of an odd event, but I know we both came away with some memorabilia, a nice little FIFA World Cup 2026 notepad, and definitely some good takeaways from the FIFA folks that made their way up to Vancouver. And I imagine they've done a similar event in Toronto as well. But the big week is, of course, coming up later this week, Inter Miami against the Vancouver Whitecaps in the Concacaf Champions Cup semifinal. I'm going to start off on a sharp note. Do you have a prediction for this tie and why? Then we'll get into the specifics.
Wow, let's talk about going straight to the point. In terms of prediction, not particularly. I think this is going to be a very competitive tie. It's going to be a semifinal. I think Miami are favorites. I think that's all very clear. terms of the prediction, though, I think the Whitecaps are going to go out and give an honest effort. I think that's to be clear. If I were to put a number on it, I would suggest this tie is going to be like a 2-2, like a 3-3. Like this is going to be one that's going to be decided on either away goals or on penalty kicks. I think that the Whitecaps were able to grind out results against Monterrey Pumas. So I don't have anything much beyond that. I would again lean Miami if I were to be asked. If you're gonna beat a prediction out of me, I will say Miami. But I think it's going to be extremely close.
Yeah, I do think it gets decided by away goals, regardless of which team goes through. As much as I would like the Whitecaps for the story, I think Miami, like, you just don't bet against Lionel Messi when it comes to continental competition. The amount that he's won throughout his career, 45 individual career or team career trophies, 5 Champions Leagues. He wants to add another Champions League, Champions Cup, whatever you want to call it. That I think when Messi is, determined, that's the difference maker. If this is Inter Miami without Messi and he might be injured, he might be carrying a knock, who knows how he fares on, the roughly 7-hour flight from Fort Lauderdale to Vancouver. Does that potentially play into the Whitecaps' favor? Maybe. And maybe they're good enough to beat, a team with Busquets and Suarez and Alba, and the other quality that they have on that team. But I think Messi is the difference maker in this one. You give up a free kick from 25 yards and suddenly, they've scored an away goal type thing.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately a tie like this, both teams have reached the semifinals. At a certain point, like when you're at semis, you're at finals, like fluke factor kind of goes out the window. Okay, maybe round of 16, quarterfinals, there's still some teams hanging around. Maybe they got really lucky, rode an XG wave. By a certain point, when you're here, you deserve to be here. That's why I say, like, it's going to be close. I think it's, if anything, I'm looking at other aspects of the field of, like, both teams love to hold the ball. Like, they're the two of the most ball-dominant teams in MLS. There's only one ball, so who the heck's going to hold it? Because you can't share it. Stuff like that. But ultimately, these are two very good teams. Good attacking wise. Some areas they're maybe stronger, like the Whitecaps maybe a bit stronger defensively than Miami. Miami makes up for it by having a little stronger attack, helps when you have Messi. But yes, I think ultimately it comes down to big players, right? It's okay if this tie is going to be tight, if it's going to be tightly contested, it helps to know that if you're Miami and you're getting one shot, one good moment, it's on the boot of Messi versus it's on the boot of, take your pick on the Whitecaps. Even if it's Brian White with what form he's in, you're taking Messi every time. That's just the level of player that he is. But I guess on the flip side, if you're the Whitecaps, you'll just hope that your depth does its job. Okay, if it's not coming to Brian White, what's nice is that you'd be confident with Pedro Vite taking that shot. Ali Ahmed, even, he hasn't scored yet, but you feel like one's coming. You'd hope it comes in this tie. Emmanuel Sabi, the way he's been playing. If Ryan Gauld is healthy, you'd certainly want to give him some shots. Whereas Miami, once it's not Messi, once it's not Suarez, who's gonna be taking that shot? Is it gonna be Big Boy Benji or whatever the heck they're calling him, Benjamin Kramaski? Maybe, but certainly that's, I guess, another edge the Whitecaps will have is that if they do keep Messi quiet, you do feel a bit more confident in their chances. But Messi, you don't keep Messi quiet, so that's not really something you can plan for. You just gotta hope and do your best to limit those around him.
The Whitecaps do have a slight advantage that many teams don't have when they take on Messi, in the fact that their defensive midfielder has already beaten Messi and shut down Messi for Paraguay in a 2-1 win against Argentina. Andres Cubas did well against Lionel Messi and Argentina in World Cup qualifying back in November. What does that matchup look like to you, Andres Cubas versus Lionel Messi?
I think Messi should probably wear some bigger shin pads, is my guess, because Cubas is shown to a lot of players around MLS that, he's a nice guy. You see it. He's a bit of a, classic defensive midfielder. Great, always with the smile off the field. Super nice guy. He's not huge, but man, on the field, something just unlocks in him. So I definitely feel he'll be asked to mark closely. I think what's nice with the Whitecaps is he can physically match that battle. Sometimes teams just don't have a stopper like that, and that's hard to deal with. Whereas I think with Cubas, if you're Sorensen, you can just kind of be like, Cubas, deal with Messi, and that frees up Berhalter, that frees up Vite. There's not as much like, okay, because it's Messi, you need all 4 midfielders to tuck in and help. I think Cubas on his own can handle that 1v1 matchup, so I think that helps the Whitecaps a lot because that will free up their other players to focus on other defensive assignments. I think one thing that I found really interesting, I was doing some research on this, Messi's touches are down by an average of 20 to 30 a game compared to when he was in Europe. My kind of hypothesis for that is when he was playing with PSG or playing with Barcelona, you couldn't man mark Messi. Why? Because you had Neymar, you had Mbappe. The more you man mark them, you leave players like this open. In MLS, I think teams were kind of making the gamble last year. Oh, let's just like man mark Messi. But, the guys around him aren't bad either. And I think the fact that the Whitecaps have a guy like Kubas who can focus on Messi and can also focus their attention on the rest of the players gives them a bit of an edge that other MLS teams have struggled with in the past.
Yeah, I think one of those players that does give them a bit of the edge is Sebastian Berhalter, because we saw him over the years with Vanni Sartini play more of that defensive midfielder / 8 role. He's shifted out wide this year, but he can still drift centrally and be defensively responsible, but he can also serve as that transitionary piece, as he has a little bit more this year. Whereas on the other side, you have Pedro Vite at this point, who is a bit more of an attacker than, being defensively aware, but you have that kind of swing piece in Sebastian Berhalter that can kind of take some of the weight off Andres Kubas when the ball shifts to either side.
Yeah, no, that's also a huge element, right? That it's not all on Kubas, but I think for the Whitecaps, their big strength here as well, along with Kubas, and I think this is something that goes back to what Jesper Sorensen said when he was hired. I don't think he knew he had a chance of playing Messi as soon as he did, but some people, they were kind of asked about his style, and he joked. He's like, well, Lionel Messi's in this league, right? We always talk about how to defend Lionel Messi. For me, we keep the ball. Can't really attack, he can't hurt you if he doesn't have the ball or anything of that like. So I do think that's also another edge that the Whitecaps are going to have. That, okay, off the ball, I think they're going to have plenty of options. Kubas, Berhalter is the reason why the Whitecaps have the lowest XG against, lowest shots against. They do a great job of defending, but I think on the ball is also going to be another big positive aspect for them.
When you look at this Inter Miami team as well, I know you and I have talked about potentially what they could look like against the Whitecaps. They've trotted out a few different ways of attacking this year. Sometimes it's a 4-4-2, sometimes it's a 4-3-3, a bit more of a free roll for Messi. It doesn't quite seem like head coach Javier Mascherano is really, committed to one style. He doesn't necessarily rest his players at any point. Messi's played 7 full 90s since the start of April. It's going to be likely 8 if he gets on the pitch to start against the Whitecaps, which all indications kind of point towards him doing so. Fully trained with Miami the last couple of days, and he'll likely make the trip to Vancouver, barring something exceptional. Of course, that being a very long flight. But when you're looking at this Inter Miami team, where do you see the threats, and potentially what would your sort of predicted lineup be?
Yeah, I think for one, I think Messi's the obvious threat. Let's not kid ourselves. But I think the fascinating thing is what's around him, because with Messi, you see it when he plays. He's naturally a bit more of a playmaker, right? He's an exceptional goal scorer. He can hurt you from 30 yards, 40 yards, but he loves to combine with his teammates. Suarez is the big one. He for him, it's really on and off. Obviously, he's got a documented history of knee injuries. So I think just the reality is some weeks you're getting a better, maybe the ice bath was hitting a little better, whatever injection he got in his knee, whatever supplements just feels better. And then other weeks it's just rough. That's how it is sometimes, especially when you're in your late 30s. But when Suarez is on, he's about as good of a target, not just because he's an exceptional striker, but he just knows where Messi likes to pass, likes to play. A couple things I do wonder is Fafa Pico, former Whitecap, does he get called to step in against his old team? I think the speed he brings can potentially test the Whitecaps backline with how aggressive they are. So that's something to watch, because Miami do play a very interesting style where it's very like Argentina coded. It's like they love the 4-4-2, where it's like 4 central midfielders, Messi in a free roll, Suarez up front, and their wingback or their fullbacks basically playing like wingbacks. But by having Pico in and you switch to a bit more of a 4-3-3, that could give you a bit of a different element to attack the Vancouver fullbacks. Otherwise, from what I've seen in Miami, that midfield is no joke. You got guys like Redondo, Allende, Busquets, Kramaski, of course, Messi. They can really control and dominate a game in that area. And I think that's something for the Whitecaps. You have to be ready for a tough battle in that midfield, because I don't think LA quite were. Granted, LA did a great job in the counterattack and should have won the game in the counterattack. And I think that's why for the Whitecaps, we'll talk about it in a sec, they should probably throw some speed on the field. But for Miami, those are definitely the areas I'd be watch for. On top of the fullbacks flying forward, those also, Jordi Alba had a ridiculous season last year. He had 20 goal contributions as a fullback. Like, that's just insanity. He's obviously a big threat.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at, this Miami roster, they've seemed to have a little bit of trouble having, space out wide because they'll play Redondo out wide, but he's naturally drifting a little bit more inside. And then you see Messi kind of being moved around. Sometimes Segovia is playing in the midfield, and I've liked Telasco Segovia, but more so when he's in the attack, and he can be a real threatening player. And then their backline has a lot of questions as well. So in this game, I would like to see, in terms of if Miami want to get a result, Fafa Pico on that right side in front of Jordi Alba, I think could be the spot for him. You have Kramaski on the left, Busquets in the middle, and then either what it has been usually in MLS is Redondo kind of playing on that right side, or Tadeo Allende. But I think Pico could be a better matchup there, and that could, Pico, Messi, Alba, that's a pretty good right side.
Left side, I would say Alba's always on the left, and Pico versus Ocampo would actually be a very good matchup. So Ocampo flies forward a lot. So Pico, Pico, I know he had his best moments on the left for the Whitecaps. So I would agree with that, assuming you meant left.
Yeah, I was reading my graph wrong. To be fair, I'd drawn it out on the screen here, and I was reading it wrong, not flipping it behind. But one of the players on Inter Miami that a few people seem to have questions about is Julian Gressel. He's not gotten an MLS minute this year. Seems kind of on the outs of Mascherano's plans. Seems confusing for what was one of the best Whitecaps players in his time here, and then went on to success at Columbus as well.
Yeah, just leave him when they go back to Miami, right? Just keep him there, reunite. I mean, no, obviously he wanted to go out east for family reasons. He's made that clear. I think even now when asked, that's something he's reiterated. So yeah, definitely one for the Whitecaps. While Pico is going to be probably the big story, just given how good he was last year. He won a lot of fans in the Man I Love Fafa fan club, as they're called. You can spell out that acronym and see why see what that spells out. But he was Pico is a great guy. Would show up in the Vespas, lots of stuff. But Gressel himself, like, for what you can give him is, even though for reasons that were beyond the football, he wanted to go home, he gave his all on the field. He was excellent. He always represented the club well. Never said any bad things about the club. Had great things to say after. To the Whitecaps' credit, they handled that situation well from a player perspective, even if it maybe hurt their ambitions short term in that 2023 season. So it'll be cool to see Gressel back, and a bit of a bittersweet moment to see how little he is involved on this team, because he could have a big role to play for Miami, and man, he could have a great role to play on a Whitecaps team like this, like under Sorensen. That what he can do on the ball, man, that would be a great fit.
And we did have a question from a stigmatic survivor.bluesky.social. The entire Caps lineup has been playing well, so it's tempting to imagine staying pat this year. But realistically, who should look to be sold? Who should look to lock down? And where should they look to upgrade or bring in a development prospect? Especially curious about guys like Pedro Vite and Eddie Ocampo. I think Vite is probably as good as gone come the summer. I think, given the way he's playing, he's going to have offers, whether in South America to go back there on a more enticing contract to one of the bigger clubs and potentially a hefty transfer fee, or to Europe. There were some loose connections with AS Roma, it looked like last week. I know that those reports made their way out there, several people saying that they were false. But that does seem like the kind of club that could take a flyer on a young player like Pedro Vite.
Yeah, I think Vite is just the biggest situation because of the fact he's a free agent at the end of the year. It'll be interesting to see what he does, because one thing with being a U22 player as he is, he's pretty underpaid relative to his position. On the flip side, if you're the Whitecaps, Axel Schuster made some very interesting comments this weekend saying about how he's had discussions with Vite about potentially keeping him around past the World Cup. You do have to remember, I think Vite at this point will be at that World Cup. He's become a key part of Ecuador as a starter. This is going to be, there's a chance Ecuador plays games at his home field, which, that'd be a cool story for him. Of course, the odds of that happening in the draw are quite low, I must admit. But hey, Ecuador got drawn into the host group last time. It wouldn't be unprecedented. But yes, no. So for Vite, that would make sense. Maybe you give him a heftier contract, like a max TAM. We have to remember is 1.8 mil. And you'd be like, look, you sign that contract, you get paid for a year and a half, and then we sell you. That depends. But yes, his situation is definitely the most pressing, because I think if you retain him, it alters what you do in the offseason. Whereas if you lose him, that's a big hole to fill. And JC Ngando has done a great job of it, but Vite has been exceptional this year. Otherwise, The only big stories I think to watch are Ali Ahmed, of course, with how he's been playing for Canada, the fact that they're, the Athletic had all those rumors this offseason about Bundesliga, Serie A. Ahmed's leveled up so far this year. He's getting more goal contributions. He just needs some goals, period. I do wonder if Ahmed in the summer, if there's, again, names continuing to swirl around him. But yeah, otherwise, the thing the Whitecaps have done great is just like locking down their guys long term, like White, Gall, Adekugbe, Kubas, Berhalter, Blackman, Veselinovic. A lot of these guys are all locked down. It's like they've got this core for another couple years. So it's more like fringes. For example, I know Yohei Takaoka's contract's starting to come close to coming up. Do you potentially, what happens there? Do you promote the young promising goalkeepers you have, like Isaac Boehmer or Max Anchor, of course, gotten off to a good start with Pacific? Do you back Takaoka? Do you get an experienced face? That's something to watch. But otherwise, I think this squad, it will probably stay the same for the next 18 months.
In terms of additions, I would probably think the Whitecaps are looking at depth additions, but one of the wingback roles or fullback roles could use some depth. I think left back is pretty good with Adekugbe there, and Tate Johnson's looked fine. But I do think you could use some depth on the other side.
100% the right back. And yeah, I'd also add some depth in the midfield too, even if Vite doesn't leave. Because right now it's Kubas, Priso, Berhalter, Vito, and Gando. Yes, you can slot Gald back in there, but ideally I think you want another number 8, regardless if Vite stays or goes. And the thing is that we forget about this was somehow the Whitecaps still have some U22 spots to play with and even more. So like if they can go out and get like another Vite, like a guy who's maybe a year or two away, this would be a great time to do it, because you bring a young guy like that in a winning environment for him to learn over the next year. That's how you create continuity that you're seeing at clubs at LAFC, at Miami, etc. So I think that would be a very good idea from the Whitecaps. And they've already started to do that, right? Like bringing in Jaden Nelson, bringing in Ocampo, some of those guys. It would be nice to see them target something like that in the midfield.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting. And of course, the Whitecaps also have an MLS game in between the two Miami games that they'll have to balance in against Minnesota United this weekend, a trip there. But it does shorten up the travel, I would think, a little bit potentially, or maybe it extends it. We'll have to see exactly what that looks like for the Whitecaps. But we'll jump into our Canadians abroad as well. And once again, it was a week of Davids. First, there was Jonathan. He had 2 goals and an assist in a 3-1 win versus Auxerre. He busted a little bit of a mini slump. He now has 16 goals in Liga and 25 in all competitions this season. That's allowed him to join some impressive company this year.
Yeah, it's again with Jonathan David, this year's almost felt quiet because the last 2 years ago was kind of the breakout. He finally took that jump into the 20s, and then last year it was fun. This year, I mean, I guess the breakout was Champions League, so now that that's been over, we've kind of forgotten. But I just thought it was fascinating because David hit 15 plus league goals, and like there's hitting 15 goals in a top 5 league is always an impressive achievement. David's done it 4 times now. Just because I was curious, I threw this on FB Ref, and there's only been 8 players since 2020/2021 when David moved to France who have hit 15 goals 4 times. And when you adjust it to 13 goals, because of course David scored 13 goals in his first season in France, despite not scoring till like January that year, there's only 5 other players who have scored 13 plus goals in each of the last 5 top 5 league seasons. Mo Salah, Erling Haaland, Kylian Mbappe, Robert Lewandowski, Harry Kane. Like those are about, like, in terms of top strikers in Europe, guys you'd want on your team, top goal scorers. If you include Salah and Mbappe, not necessarily strikers, that's who you want to be with. So yes, I know some will say Farmers League, Liga, yada. The reality is, like, if it was so easy, there'd be more names on that list. And I think credit has to be given for Jonathan David's consistency. And I think just when remember he's a free agent, if your club's looking at stats like that, you're just thinking, man, what could he do on their team?
Then there was Promise David as well. He had a brace and a big 2-1 USG win against Genk, which featured an insane moment late in the game involving their backup goalkeeper throwing a ball on the pitch. That gives David 16 goals in the Juniper Pro League and 21 in all competitions. And USG are now tied with Genk and 2 points behind Bruges, having won all 4 of their championship round games. Once again, the Belgian league system makes no sense. Their next 3 games, by the way, Bruges, and Genk, talk about a chance to make a statement for USG and Promise David.
So you say it doesn't make sense, but like, look at that. Like how like I don't know. I look at some of these leagues, and it's just like I get it. It's even, it's balanced, but it does hurt a little bit to look at some of these battles, and you're like, man, the top two teams aren't going to play each other because they played each other in January, right? Like for example, Liverpool, they're cruising to this title in the Premier League. They beat Leicester this weekend. Yay, good for them. I don't know. I just something gives me a good itch here when you look at USG's schedule, that it's just like, oh yeah, you beat Genk, the team in front of you. You get Bruges, you get Genk. Like you're whoever comes out of this with the title, it's going to be a deserved winner because they're all playing each other multiple times. So that's when I want to give credit to the Belgian league for creating the fact that the title is being decided between the teams that have deserved it throughout the year, and also for Promise David. This is pretty cool, right? Like the fact is he's on fire right now, and it's against the best of the best. He has 6 goals in the championship round, if I'm not mistaken, or it's 5. Either way, he's scored in every championship round game. The stakes have never been higher than for USG this season, and he's stepped up. I love that as well from the players, because these are the moments you live for, and David stepping up. And man, if you're Canada thinking, okay, I think the discussions are only going to continue to heat up of let's get this guy some minutes and let's see what this David duo is all about.
Yeah, I think that will be exciting, but I also think you do have to give Taniolo a fair run. Now, Minnesota United has kind of cooled off goal scoring wise. Of course, they'll get a chance against the Whitecaps this week, and that won't be an easy test for them. Maybe the Whitecaps have a little bit of rotation as well, but could that potentially be something where you are trying, Oluwase and Promise at the Gold Cup with no Jonathan David if he opts to not go to the tournament, and then maybe whoever performs better there gets the first chance with Jonathan David in a meaningful game?
Yeah, I think you have to look at Tanny, of course, but yeah, I think we know. I think we know what Tanny brings and where he stands. And I think with Promise David, there's just so much untapped potential there that you want to have a look at what he brings to the table. So no, don't forget Tani Oluwase in that mix by any stretch. But also I think just what the year Promise David had, it would just feel criminal in a sense if we don't see a proper audition. Because man, if this is what USG are getting from him in this conference, you can only imagine what Marsh can get out of him.
And another week, another assist for Alistair Johnston, who helped Celtic beat St. Johnstone in the Scottish Cup semi-finals. That sends Celtic to another final and gives AJ an impressive 10 assists on the season. What have you seen from Johnston as of late?
Yeah, just good to see him back in and around the goals again. 10 assists is always impressive for any fullback. So just wanted to give credit to that. He had a hot start to the year and cooled down offensively. So you did wonder if he'd hit that mark, but he's hit that mark. Celtic are cruising. They're going to win the league. They've already won one of the cups. They play Aberdeen in the final of the Scottish Cup. I think they're going to win that. Another trouble for Alistair Johnston. There were rumors, months ago of him going to Fulham. You do wonder after a year like this if they'd be in, clubs like that or others are interested, because I just love how much more involved Johnston's been. He's clearly been given the green light to underlap, overlap, run forward, be involved. And as we saw at Montreal when he had a similar freedom, he is very good at that. We forget it because he's good defensively. He's that's his best attribute, but he's also got some pretty untapped potential.
And Olivia Smith as well scored amid transfer rumors, helping Liverpool to a 2-1 win against Brighton. She's now at 9 goals on the season, and just proving that if a transfer were to come in, it would probably be record-breaking.
Yeah, 100%, right? When you see clubs like Lyon linked to her, I know we threw out Barcelona last week on the show, but Lyon wouldn't be too bad either, given the history of attacking talent that they have. So for Smith, I love that she's just staying cool amid it. Those rumors, Liverpool is pushing to I don't think a title will happen. In fact, I think it's probably mathematically impossible, but I think Europe still might be on the table for them. It would be nice for Smith to push them on, because again, she's 20. Clubs will be circling, because players like this at this age, when they're performing like she is, they tend to make big moves, and that's super exciting.
And of course, the Canadian women's national team announced just this morning a couple of friendly matches against Haiti. We spoke about it briefly earlier in the show, but those games will happen in Winnipeg, a bit of a new stop for Canadian soccer. It's been years, if ever, that Canada Soccer has played a match in Winnipeg, and Montreal as well, a return to Stade Saputo, where, of course, the Canadian women's national team has played in the past. Going to be nice to see a new spot for Canadian soccer. I think they can get the stitching off the field in Winnipeg. I think they have for some Manitoba Bisons games because they play there. Of course, Desiree Scott, one of the few U Sports players to make it all the way up to the national team, having played with the Manitoba Bisons. But what do you think about Desiree Scott finally, officially stepping away from the national team as well as these two friendlies?
Yeah, and they upgraded the turf last year at Princess Auto. Of course, that hurt Valor in the sense they had to start their year with 7 games on the road. But when they came back, they had a beautiful new turf, as beautiful as turf can be. As we're always going to prefer grass, but hey, it's nice to have a turf that looks like that. So no, I think for this Canadian team, it's exciting, just a chance to connect in new markets. It's especially it's special, sorry, that it's Scott going to our hometown. I think that's super fitting, super awesome that you get an opportunity to do this because, as we know, you don't often get the opportunity to leave on your own terms. So now, within the last few years, you get Sinclair and Schmidt getting a send off in their hometown. Now you get Scott a send off in her hometown. I think it's just fitting because those three, you include Aaron McLeod as well, some of the others in that mix, like they were such. Like that 2012 team, of course, so important for Canadian soccer at large. So it's cool to see them get the send-offs they deserve. And hopefully Winnipeg can show up because I think this is the new reality. Jesse Marsh spoke about it. Casey Stoney spoke about it. They want to get out to new markets. You're seeing, the men's national team train at Halifax this summer. Over the next 2-3 years in the aftermath of the World Cup. Like, for example, in the aftermath of the World Cup, we have to remember Canada will go back to reality where they might have to play teams like, Belize and the Cayman Islands in the first round. I'd love a game like that to be played in Saskatchewan, in Halifax, in, name whatever, city we have in Victoria, right? Get that game out in Starlight, ditto for the women's national team and, their continued friendlies and other games. So yeah, no, I think this will be hopefully a start of a lot of games like that being more common in the future.
Yeah, I don't know quite what I was thinking when my mind immediately went to women's soccer and the Manitoba Bisons that they don't play on the stitching there. Of course, Valor plays at Princess Auto Stadium that they have not had the stitching. Yeah, U Sports code in mind that matches up the two Bisons, the Bison alumni and the Bisons women's soccer team. But we'll get into the Northern Super League as well. Of course, the first week fully gone. We saw AFC Toronto lose their first game against the Montreal Roses. Last week, we were gassing up AFC Toronto here on the podcast. I said Montreal Roses could be the surprise of the season and potential winners as well. And maybe not convincing last week, but they do get the first win. We've got our full match week on the docket for this week. Halifax against Calgary. Halifax getting their first match at the Wanderers grounds. Ottawa also opening their time as a club and at home against AFC Toronto. And then the Vancouver Rise take on the Montreal Roses at Swan Garden. What's a bit of a second opener as well.
Yeah, and it'll be cool to just, get a bit of a routine now that just have these games regular. I think it was cool to have the standalone opener with the Rise, then BMO on a Saturday. It was cool to see the Montreal Roses, AFC Toronto. Like, shout out to the Roses. They looked good. Granted, we're not surprised. I think we, at least I've been saying a lot. We've been all saying between you and Brendan and I, this looks like it's going to be a league of Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. But hey, 4 teams make the playoffs. As we know, sometimes you just got to get in. I think for these, everyone, it's just going to be about chemistry. It's going to be about little things. And like, to Montreal's credit, that's where they really killed Toronto in this game. Like, Montreal looked organized. They looked disciplined. They scored in the second minute. I think they only allowed 1 XG the rest of the game, despite Toronto furious push throughout the match. Like, I think Montreal, that discipline, that organization they showed is going to go a long way. But yeah, no, I'm curious to see what this next matchup looks like. Like, Calgary, they impressed us in some ways. Maybe they're not more than I thought they would in week 1 against Vancouver. It's going to be a good test on the grass of Halifax. Of course, Ottawa, no idea what to expect, but should hopefully be some good things there. Toronto looking to bounce back. And Vancouver, Montreal, the first 2 teams who won in the league getting faced off. That could be maybe a bit of an early preview of what later games in the season could look like. Eh?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, especially having the 3 matches on grass this week. I know that both Lydia Bedford and Anya Heiner-Muller, after that first game at BC Place, mentioned how difficult that was to play some of the balls that they want to that just kind of skipped away on the plastic grass, that they're going to slow down potentially on the natural grass at Swangard and across the league. I guess Ottawa is still turf, so it'll be interesting to see what what happens there and how that will look. But Vancouver and Montreal, two teams that came out as winners in that first week, getting a chance to play on natural grass. And then, of course, Halifax getting their opener as well. And what I hope is a very similar atmosphere to what we've seen with the HFX Wanderers in the CPL in terms of having just, the best atmosphere in Canadian soccer to watch a game. And I hope that translates over to the Tides. And I think it will.
Yeah, and I think what was kind of buried in the lead this offseason, I know the Wanderers grounds, there's been all the talk of expanding the stadium, making it permanent. But I didn't realize, maybe I just haven't been paying attention as much as I should have, that they actually expanded the grounds. I think the new capacities in the 7,000s now. Before it was in the high 5,000s. So the Wanderers this weekend, we'll talk CPL in a bit, but they set a new record for attendance, and they'll set it again because they didn't fully get the new capacity. That's going to be great for both teams. You could feel the difference it made having that extra 1,000 or so for the Wanderers, and hopefully the Tides can push some of those games into the 7,000s and show that Halifax is a sneaky soccer city, and having the Tides and Wanderers together at the grounds will further affirm that.
And we also, on the last episode, talked about the lack of drums at the Rise versus Wild opener. There were drums at AFC Toronto against CF Montreal, but they looked like, a higher drum line behind the supporters. And I know reading some of the online comments, whether they're on Facebook, Discord, Reddit, it seemed like some people weren't too pleased with the drums in terms of their sound annoyance, people potentially not used to watching soccer. But what do you think of a higher drum line for the opener?
Yeah, all that stuff takes time. All I would say is, shout out. Brendan's not here, but Canadian Soccer Daily, Thomas Hewitt wrote an article speaking with some of those Toronto supporters, and there were some interesting quotes in there. Check it out if you haven't. Just talking about supporter culture, building it. There's a lot of stuff we talked about, but to hear it from supporters who are building this at the grassroots level was very interesting. And yeah, those are some of the challenges they'll face. That maybe some of the angry people on Facebook will be like, "Hey, what's all this about annoying the kids and yada yada," but that's a part of football, right? It's the atmosphere, is the crowd, and I think it's great to get these numbers in. And now I think the next step is developing that, fostering a culture, and I think it's been fascinating to read some of these efforts that people are doing coast to coast to engage that, because it's like we mentioned on the last part of the show. A league like this, it's great for the players, it's great for the administrators, it's great for media, etc. But at the end of the day, it's all about the fans. Without the fans, the league ultimately would be nothing, right? Can't be playing leagues in front of no fans. And I just love little details to grow the culture. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of trial and error and frustrating moments. And in 10, 15 years, we'll look back and then laugh about the same way we have with developments in other leagues.
And a good question from Matt Kipe as well, at Canuck Tar Heel on Twitter. Besides working together to get more soccer-specific stadiums built in Canada, what are other ways you think, potentially three, that the CPL and NSL could collaborate to help grow the game in Canada? And the one that came to mind for me is developing local soccer fields for community use, as well as academies for both the men's and women's systems. That's something that I don't think any CPL club has done, but the Whitecaps have done it with their partnership with UBC at the training center. The Rise also using the training center at points, not their main training facility, but that whole National Soccer Development Center, the whole UBC Athletic Soccer Complex has been, a cooperative effort between the Whitecaps, now the Rise, but Greg Kerfoot leading the way on both of those, as well as UBC. And I think that's the type of thing where you're opening up more community access to fields a lot of the time, because they're not being used a lot of the time. You have elite facilities for the first teams and the academies. You have sort of a focused training center where things are, centralized. I think that's the way forward. I would love to see that from, a York United perspective. If they could potentially, build themselves a training ground somewhat like the BMO training ground that Toronto FC has. Heck, I'd love to see it from a Toronto FC perspective if you want to bring more MLS teams into the conversation, but we know that TFC hasn't necessarily had that cooperation or interest in the women's game in the past, not having opened up, a women's academy outside of, a few little teams here and there. I would love to see stuff like that in terms of opening up for community, but also benefiting the elite level.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the fields is the big one. And I think what is forgotten is that we need fields at all levels. Like, we need professional fields, we need those stadiums, we need 50K stadiums, 30K, 10K, 5K. There's value in all size stadiums for differing purposes, because there's just a shortage of, those in general for professional clubs to use. But then, yes, training facilities is a great one. like just where do these players train? What are these facilities where academy players train, etc. And then I think you need grassroots fields. Like I always say in Vancouver, there's a severe lack of fields that, are felt where kids are often having to use quarters and halves of field to do their training sessions, that games will get canceled sometimes on weekends if, just because there's a lack of fields for everyone to go around and they have to postpone matches. That shouldn't be happening. And even little things, right? Like, in Europe, you see a lot of soccer courts. Well, it'd be cool if some professional teams are able to step up and create soccer courts so that you can have, 7-a-side on mini turf fields, or, 5-a-side futsal courts, or things of that regard, because I think those are all very important. So stadiums is definitely a big one. And otherwise, I think the big aspect, I guess, is just to grow the culture in other ways. I think there's subtle things that can be done to make it happen. For example, you can help a city in terms of building transit, building more, accessible ways to get to stadiums, what way to get to communities. That's always a big plus benefit. And I think if having more professional presence can help accelerate those things, you won't be mad at that. Otherwise, I think the big thing is just player development. If these teams have access to knowledge, facilities, coaches, even little things, right? You talk about, like, okay, if it's a Rise and the Whitecaps working together, if they can share things like heart equipment, right? Like the metrics that track players' hearts, VOs, so that you can film games, stuff like that. I think just having that access to development would be huge for players as well, because having those pooled resources, sometimes those stuff, cameras, heart rate monitors, special equipments that teams need to be at the top level can be expensive. So if teams can share stuff like that, I think that would also maybe be an underrated aspect to look at.
Yeah, I think the word is almost share instead of collaborate, because collaborations, I guess you could do a sort of a ticket collaboration, like you buy a TFC ticket, you get 50% off an AFC Toronto ticket, or you get free transit or something like that to entice people to make the trip up to York Lions Stadium, because that will be the challenge for AFC Toronto, especially given the reliability of the TTC these days in terms of it shutting down on weekends and track maintenance and all that. That has made it, tough to get up to York Lions Stadium at times, whether for York United or York Lions games. I think when you look at youth soccer is where you have to kind of focus the efforts of collaboration rather than sharing, because could you get more involvement from the entire, CPL and NSL involving, the grassroots house league level? Like, you're not necessarily investing in the high performance athletes, but you just want people to enjoy the league, know the league exists, because I think that that's still something that lacks in Canada, both for the CPL and of course for the NSL being so new, is people just don't know the league exists. So if you can have, guest coaches go to, these youth soccer training sessions to just kind of raise awareness, run a little session. I know that when I was in Vancouver United's, house league programs, when I was little, we would have, so-called pro coaches come in. I think they were just, guys with a British accent that would come in and run us through some drills. But it was always exciting when, a guy in a big puffer jacket would come in and you thought he knew what he was doing. But now imagine if that person coming in was, from the Rise or from Pacific or Vancouver FC, like that offers a little bit more of an edge to it and a bit more of a connection to the club, which I think some people in North American sports, especially kids, can feel kind of disconnected from the club.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it in 2023, right, with Vancouver FC. There was at one point every week, I remember, and they'd go to their old clubs. Like Callum Irving went to Marpole, Caden Chung went out to Poco, etc. It was cool to see that sort of engagement. That's a big one. And yeah, I think that's also an underrated aspect, is if you're getting kids involved, families involved long term. I mean, the great thing about this sport, you see it especially a lot in Europe, like there's huge social benefit to having strong sporting ecosystems, but especially soccer, given its accessibility, etc. Is that, like it creates, a place where people can go and see friends and, enjoy the social aspect of the game. It doesn't always boil down to winning and losing. I think you really see it, in cultures like Germany, where they just got such incredible fan support. And I think it would be cool to build that up long term, because I think that's the one advantage that soccer would have in this country, is that you see it. A lot of the other sports can sometimes feel very, like commodities, that's just the North American way, right? Like little details that will always irk fans. But if soccer can find a way to also continue that community aspect, I think that would always be hugely beneficial as well.
And of course, in the CPL as well, the season continued on with match day 3. Cavalry 1, Vancouver 1, Atletico Ottawa 3-2 over York in an exciting match. Halifax got their home opener on with a 3-1 win over Pacific, and Forge tied Valor 1-1. A good result for Valor after some early season struggles. What did you see from the CPL this weekend, Alex? I know you were on Halifax Pacific.
Yeah, just a great weekend. All teams scored, which is never a bad thing, right? Yeah, all teams scored. You ticked them off about every major box. Cavalry had a late equalizer. Ottawa scored in the 95th minute to win with an old player scoring against his old team, right? Or that's always a good story. Halifax in front of a big crowd. That Pacific game was back and forth. And then Forge Valor, you had a bit of drama, right? Dan Nimick steps up, chance to win the game with a penalty. And the only keeper to ever stop him before, Nimick's got almost perfect rate on penalties, steps up and stops him again to give Valor a very, very valuable road point. Just so many fascinating storylines. And no, definitely interesting to see some usual trends maintained, like Cavalry continue to start years slow, but they're always going to come hot in the summer. At the same time, this is a chance for other teams to build momentum. Ottawa looks great. They're playing fun, entertaining, high-octane soccer. That game against York was incredible, one of the best CPL games I've seen. But then Halifax, they start slow. I think last year they didn't get their first win till game 10. Year before, they didn't get it took them 9 games to get 7 points. They already have 7 points after 3 games. They look great. They're showing a different side to them. All of a sudden, you're looking at that mix and thinking, okay, like this title race. Of course, it's early. It's only 3 weeks, but there are signs from Halifax, Ottawa, that are showing that, okay, they're going to want to push the Forges and the Cavalries. And the nice thing is it's early enough in the season where Vancouver, who finally put together a positive performance, they can build on that draw against Calgary. York has shown some good things. Pacific, Valor, that they can also throw themselves in the mix. But definitely the early winners so far this year have been Ottawa and Halifax, I would say.
And when you look at Vancouver FC, they get their first point of the season. Nico Mesquita gets his first goal. Do you think he could, rise to stardom with this club?
Yeah, 100%. He's a great signing. I think what was interesting to see was how they tweaked their play. First few weeks, they kind of struggled to get Alejandro Diaz and Terran Campbell the ball. They switch formations. Mesquita kind of plays more of a 10. Finally, his natural position. Campbell switches out to the right, which he's kind of played before as a winger. Diaz up front. That just seemed to work. Gave them a bit more involvement. That's something to watch because I think, again, the reality is that Campbell and Diaz have been 2 of the best strikers in this league in the history. Mesquita, if he can come in and feed them service and provide a third option, that's huge. And I think we finally saw Vancouver do that because in the first 2 games, they were kind of struggling, barring that Campbell goal against Ottawa. So that was a good sign.
And Noah Batney as well, scoring against his former club in the final moments. I know you talked about it on CPL Newsroom, but what do you think of Noah Batney and where he could potentially get this year?
Yeah, no, he's definitely feels like one of the big U21 Canadians to watch. Just anytime a 20-year-old center back is doing the things he's doing, leading a back 3, just so good on the ball. Of course, we know that he was in Europe. I think it was like Lazio Academy. He's obviously got that pedigree, but we're just seeing a lot of growth in his game. And yeah, it's exciting because this U21 crop, there's a lot of exciting names. You throw out a Batney, it's one of them. There's Emmerich Fotzing, the 17-year-old at Vancouver, had a great game against Cavalry. Forge, you got Kadeem Kane, who's been putting in some excellent performances in a new role for Forge. That's been something to watch. Like there's some interesting U21s in this group, and definitely I'm sure Jesse Marsh might have to be calling in 2 or 3 of them the Gold Cup if this keeps up.
And the Canadian men's national team not making a ton of news in the last week. We touched on a lot of it in Canucks Abroad, but a question from Leafs Chirp. I'm in the Junior Hoylett bandwagon. I think he's the missing piece for our offense. He has great ball handling skills, distributes the ball well, and great at set pieces and excellent at takeaways. I know he isn't a shiny new toy like David, but is he a legitimate short-term plan for this attack? We've talked about him for set pieces before.
Yeah, 100%. And I'd like to have him around at the Gold Cup, just in terms of that veteran experience, especially if you're missing, some of your leaders like a Davies due to injury and Eustachio due to Club World Cup. Those are your 2 captains, right? So that does leave a bit of a leadership void. Of course, that provides an opportunity for guys to step up. we don't know who will be there, but you assume if an Alistair Johnson's there, seeing that he wore the armband most recently in that US game when Davies came off, you want to see him step into a big leader role. Jonathan David, if he's around, but also just having a guy like Hoylett around, I think would be a huge plus in that regard. So no, I think for Hoylett, he's definitely continues to be in and around the mix. It's going to be hard for him to keep a regular space with just how loaded the attack is, but there are definitely going to be camps for him, and it'll be interesting to see if he can make the World Cup squad. That might be a bit tougher, but definitely he has a role to play in the lead up. And hey, given his career, given his pedigree, I wouldn't bet against him for 26 because he just continues to age like a fine wine.
And also MLS, the first weekend of the season where no Canadian team lost a game. It was a chaotic Saturday night, 15 MLS games, way too many on one night. I get that they didn't want to do, Easter Sunday, but that was overwhelming. Shout out to TFC. They won their first game of the season, beating RSL 1-0, thanks to a goal from Theo Corbiano. Could he potentially make his way back into the national team at some point?
Early days, but this is why he made this move, right? In just Europe, he kept getting lost in the wilderness. Good stints like the one he had, in Switzerland. He had some other good stints, but just consistency eluded him, especially when he went to Granada and Spain. So I think with TFC, it's just finding a bit of confidence, finding minutes. Hopefully this goal can do it. Because it was a well-taken goal. Of course, Corbiano, we know, loves Ronaldo, had the number 7 whipped out a bit of a C, which was funny to see him pull off. But no, for Corbiano, good for him. And for TFC as a whole, like, I just want to say how disciplined and organized they look under Robin Fraser as of late. I think that's a very good sign to him. We know he has that side as a coach. Like, his teams have organized and disciplined, and it's impressive how much more disciplined and organized his team looks like. Because last year, of course, they struggled at that. Even early to start this year, there was some worries. And this is at least giving them a shot of winning games. Okay, now they got to work on the attack because, you see the scores from their last few games. It's like 1-0, 0-0. Hasn't been the most exciting, but it's definitely that foundation is giving them a good platform to build off.
And the Whitecaps, of course, a 0-0 draw against St. Louis. Shout out to Eddie Aracampo for getting the boos every time he touched the ball after a bit of embellishment in the second half. And Montreal remains without a win, but they did draw Orlando City, and they shut down a good Orlando City attack as well.
Yeah, again, with Montreal, you're kind of seeing with Marco Donadel, if you're going to use that Robin Fraser, parallel, Donadel's come in and he's just brought a bit of structure, changed the formation, gone for that back four. And I think that's been good for Montreal defensively. At the same time, of course, they're going to want to get firing a bit more in front of the goals, get some wins, be a bit more entertaining. They've got pieces to do that, even if they don't have the most high investment. They still got some entertaining attacking players, but sometimes that foundation is needed when you're in a bad place. And I think for Toronto and Montreal, that could be what's needed. Although what I will say, we're quietly 7 days away from both of them facing off in the Canadian Championship. That feels like it could be season defining for both. Like, if Toronto wins that, between that and their form in the league lately, all of a sudden they think, okay, maybe we can make a run in that tournament. Maybe we can, push for the MLS playoffs. On the flip side, same with Montreal. That could be a big win. And if you're the team losing that, all of a sudden that's probably your most accessible trophy out the window in late April. I think that tie is definitely going to be one to watch with the way that are trending.
And a question from Nick Spirit 4 as well. Any update on the status of the sale of the Vancouver Whitecaps?
Nothing as of now. The last update we heard was the whole stadium news, which, is a positive sign for the Whitecaps that, they've been working with the city to potentially build something at P&E. Of course, between that and the news of the PWHL team expanding to Vancouver getting a PWHL team, which could mean a bit of a facelift for Pacific Coliseum. You do wonder if all these are linked, if all the clubs are looking at the P&E as maybe a bit of a revitalized space for sports. All of a sudden, maybe there, talks of a SkyTrain open up there. You have to be encouraged by all of those developments. So I know for the Whitecaps, the long-term plans to keep them in Vancouver, they're just all about finding the owner. The unfortunate reality is that stuff can take time. I know RSL last week finalized a sale after years of working on that. So for the Whitecaps, we might not get an answer until after the World Cup, but there have been a lot of positive micro developments I think we've seen in the past month.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting to see where that goes. Of course, there's been the rumors of Indiana potentially being interested, but if the effort is to keep them in Vancouver, I don't know how much an Indiana businessman would be interested in having a club that consistently loses money in Vancouver, but maybe one that they could add to their portfolio for relatively cheap, considering RSL had a stadium, an NWSL team, and an MLS Next Pro team, and a training ground for 600 million US, which makes you think that the Whitecaps, without a stadium, without an NWSL team, they do have an NSL team, but that's not for sale. It makes you think that maybe 500 million US isn't quite the price tag on this team.
Yeah, but that's, I guess, why the stadium has kind of come to the forefront, that they know if maybe it's something, if you can have a commitment to a stadium, the framework of a stadium, the blueprint to a stadium at least in place, that does change the value. And I think that's something that's not lost on this ownership group, that anyways, if they were to stick around, or if it is new owners, long term this team needs its own stadium. And hopefully these latest developments are don't go the way of some of the fame. Remember the Waterfront Stadium? Let's hope it doesn't end up like that.
Yeah, I've had this dream of a Subaru Park style waterfront stadium in Vancouver where you have, one side of it that's fairly open, and you're able to see the mountains from the waterfront. I think that would have been fantastic. But seeing that game in St. Louis this weekend, a stadium like that anywhere in Canada, like I think Toronto could serve by, tearing down BMO Field completely and rebuilding a proper soccer specific stadium, because that's just a temporary pop-up stadium that's had all these, band-aids put on it over the years. And the Whitecaps, of course, need a better stadium as well.
Yeah, well, that's it. I think the reality is those soccer specific stadiums, 20 to 30K in size, perfect. If you need, you can kind of do what Montreal has, they use the Big O, for certain occasions. Maybe if you have a continental semifinal and 30,000 isn't cutting it and you want to push up the capacity, you give BC Place a call. But definitely having your own stadium is just such a huge point for many reasons, right? You can put in grass, you can attract a different caliber of players, you of course get more revenue. It's just such a hugely important aspect of running a successful soccer team. So definitely something we're keeping an eye on for the Whitecaps. And long live more new stadiums. That's the one thing that you hope this 2026 World Cup brings. But that's of course easier said than done.
Yeah, it'll certainly be exciting to see. Hopefully, new stadiums of all sizes being built across Canada and North America. It seems like the U.S. pops these stadiums up very easily wherever they are. I think Buffalo's building a stadium for their USL League One team, and that's going to be like a 5,000 person Starlight style stadium. So anything like that would be great in Canada. But that's all we've got for episode 226 of the Northern Football Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Apple, Spotify, whatever podcatcher you want to use, as well as the podcast on YouTube at the 90th minute on that YouTube page. And of course, we're on social, on Instagram, on Blue Sky, on Twitter, and then Alex and I on social as well, and Brendan too. But thanks so much for tuning in to episode 226 of the Northern Football Podcast, and we'll be back next time.